Hello and welcome to episode 61 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they broke into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. Because Tarek and I are both writers as well. You don't need it, of course, though, Tarek, because your book's coming out in October.
That's right, and this is actually the time to say I will be leaving the podcast now, Marco. I've learned all I can.
Yeah, no more hints and tips for you.
And to push the wonders of ebooks across the world.
Exactly, that's it. An ebook salesman, traveling salesman.
Traveling salesman. For a digital product.
Yeah. But no, actually, as we learn, especially from this week's guest, you're always learning as a writer, I think, and always adapting. And who is this week's guest, Tarek?
This week we are very pleased to have chatted with the wonderful Nick Hornby, who is probably well known to a lot of people. His first book was Fever Pitch, which I believe is about some kind of sport. I'm not really into sports, so I believe it might be rugby. And yes. Then, but of course, the book that perhaps is best well known for is High Fidelity, which was a 1995 book adapted into a fairly big film. Then About a Boy, which was perhaps even bigger. So he's, really
I was going to say, I think he's well known for a lot of his books.
Yeah, no, as I was saying that, I was like, that's probably more than one book.
Yeah, exactly. He's had a massive string of success with his books and has more recently moved into screenwriting as well. Mm-hmm. He's, again, had massive success there, writing things like Wild, Brooklyn, and, even getting Oscar nominations and stuff like that as well. So we talked to him about all of that and how he got into novel writing and then how he moved into the screenwriting world as well. And it's really interesting just hearing from him. I mean, he actually got into novels, as we'll hear, not in the usual way. It was an agent actually approached him as opposed to the other way around, which was, it's what you always...
the dream.
Exactly. Makes it much easier if that happens.
Cut out the whole middle step.
Exactly. And he also tells us about a very exciting project that he's working on, a TV project that he's working on just now towards the end of the podcast. So it's definitely worth listening out for that one if you're a music fan, I think.
Don't go anywhere.
Exactly.
A little bit just to make sure you stay for the very end.
Exactly, yeah, we're teasing you. But we'll get straight into the podcast after an advert for our Page One notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
did you always want to be a writer? Because I know you were a teacher for a while, but was the goal always to be a writer?
I didn't really know or think about what I wanted to do until my late teens, I guess. And then I wanted quite badly to be a writer. I wanted to write for New Musical Express, but did nothing to advance that ambition in any way whatsoever. And didn't do any writing, didn't write. Trained to be a teacher because I didn't know what else to do. And then after a couple of years, I had an idea to write. It was for a screenplay, and I thought, I'm too lazy to teach and write, so I'm going to have to pack up teaching. And for the next few years, I did a mix of like supply teaching, proofreading, writing, language teaching. The only thing that didn't pay in any of that was the writing.
And so interesting that it was a screenplay was the first thing that you thought of that you wanted to do.
Yeah, I think I'd been hampered by my university education. I was at a state school, and I was encouraged to go to Cambridge, and I went, and I shouldn't have done, really. And all the reading that I did in my university course, I wasn't a very good student, but I did do some reading, just convinced me that I wouldn't ever be a prose writer. It was the way I thought was the wrong kind of thing. And I couldn't do that English prose thing. So I thought that if I could do anything, it was that I could write dialogue and story, and that screenplay was the obvious way to start. But I didn't have a clue. I mean, I didn't know anyone in the business. I think the first things I wrote were like BBC Play for Today's, right around the time where there was no Play for Today anymore. So I was sort of happy enough writing them, sending them off in a brown envelope to the BBC, never hearing anything again, and then starting another one. That was the limit of it at the time.
So what changed then? What was the big push that made you actually say, and this is the thing I want to do, this is how I want to crack it?
Well, the wanting to do it wasn't a problem. I wanted to do it. What changed was reading the right kinds of things, actually. Was coming across a whole bunch of American writers in the 80s and thinking, oh, I didn't know this was writing too. I read, Anne Tyler was the big one for me, and Richard Ford, Raymond Carver, Laurie Moore, all very strong voices, all quite, idiomatic as well, and conversational. And I was really sort of bowled away and thought, I don't think I could write like Salman Rushdie or Julian Barnes, but maybe I could write like this. And I started to write short stories just to see if I could, and I sold a couple. And it sort of went on from there, really. An agent heard something on the radio, asked me to come in, and I'd had the idea for Fever Pitch by then. Something I was thinking about, and I pitched her this idea, even though she was sort of not like me at all, quite posh lady, and she, when I told her the idea of Fever Pitch, she said, "Oh, I can sell that," and I was so surprised that I went off and wrote the beginning of it, and that was what enabled me to go into writing full time.
That's quite interesting. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say that's quite interesting that it was an agent actually contacted you and arranged a meeting to have a discussion. That's quite unusual, I would say.
Yeah, I think from what I mean, I've got a couple of friends who are agents. One of my best friends is now my agent, and I know that she's constantly on the lookout. So, university magazines or friends recommending people, whatever. So, I think sometimes it works that way round. I don't think it works that way round in the film business, but in the books business, I think that they do need to keep looking out for younger writers.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing I learned, actually, looking back on that whole experience, is that I still think books are probably the easiest way for most writers to start off, because publishers will take a punt on a career. It doesn't cost them that much to give a small advance for a first book and then a small print run, and think, well, maybe the second book or the third book will be the one that breaks through. I mean, with me, it was my first book, but I think with screenplays, you cannot say, this is a promising writer, let's spend £5 million on this movie. You just have to send them away and say, show us the next thing.
No, totally. And of course, Fever Pitch was more a memoir. It wasn't a novel. I mean, what made you approach? Why did you choose to go down that route as opposed to sort of fictionalizing a version of it? What made you think this would work as a memoir instead?
Because I just read Tobias Wolff's This Boy's Life,
right?
And again, it was something new to me, memoir. A sort of literary memoir where you didn't have to be famous in order to write the thing. And the whole thing about football, my relationship was so intense, but I thought, the more I thought about football, just from thinking about it, just because I was sat there with nothing to do apart from think about it, the more I realised that it said quite a lot about Britain and about masculinity, and lots of us have a relationship with football through our fathers or our brothers or whatever. So there were all kinds of stories contained within it, and I thought, I'm just going to try and keep it as a memoir and see if it works.
And of course, it then went on to become a massive success. I mean, you must have been surprised by how big it got so quickly.
Yes. I mean, what I did think was that if it worked, it would be successful, because I just thought, at the time, football wasn't as commercialized as it was now, and that, I knew people would spend 30 quid on a duvet cover. Why wouldn't they spend £12 on a hardback? I'm just talking about Arsenal fans. That's quite a big market compared to most first books. Most first books sell 3,000-4,000 copies, and I thought maybe I could sell 10,000 to Arsenal fans buying it for people for Christmas or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it jumped to other teams, and then it jumped to other countries, and that was what I hadn't really anticipated. That it was about, your relationship with your club or your sport, even if you weren't an Arsenal fan, even if you weren't British, and in some cases, even if it wasn't football.
It's quite an interesting kind of plan to write something with a kind of ready-made audience, maybe almost like an untapped kind of market of, this is folk who I know will be interested in it, and rather than just kind of like so many folk in their first piece of work throw out into the void, and it's hard to try and break through and to find the audience. But it's quite a nice way.
Well, it was something I was able, when I started to talk to publishers, I'd written a bit, and my agent said, I've definitely got interest, and I went to speak to them. And it was just something that I started saying during meetings, like, I know there's a market for a book about football which is intelligent or not stupid. It wasn't a ghost-written memoir. And lots of them were very shy of it. They just said, well, football books don't work. And I was always saying, well, I don't think you publish the right kinds of books. The people who read books don't want to read these books, but they might want to read this one. And I do think you've got more of a commercial shot than you would with the first novel. So it was just it was just desperation, really, trying to think of something to say to publishers. But I was right.
You were right, yeah.
And you kind of stuck with that, right, what you know, kind of angle a little bit with High Fidelity, which was, because you're obviously a big music fan, and that was about music scene. Was that a conscious choice again to kind of tap into that area?
No, it was, I wouldn't like to give the impression that there was any conscious choice very much about anything at any stage. It was all accidental and a big surprise to me. The weird thing about about High Fidelity was that what I wanted to do was write a novel about relationships from the guy's point of view. So it was a sort of domestic fiction in the way that the kind of domestic fiction that I'd enjoyed so much reading with the Anne Tylers and the Laurie Moores, but there wasn't so much of a male perspective on it at the time. And right at the end of thinking about it and having conceived of the shape of the book, I thought, what's this guy's job going to be? I mean, it was really like that. And I thought, I've spent half my life in record shops, I'll make him a record shop owner. And once I'd done that, the music kind of took over a little bit, both in the writing and the thinking.
And did you find because obviously High Fidelity was the first novel as opposed to the memoir. Was the process for you the same though in terms of how you planned it? If you did, I'm not sure if you plan or
no,
don't
I didn't
plan
it. I haven't planned. I still don't really plan. I remember thinking, "Oh, this is really different," because it's just a very basic thing that when you're writing a memoir, you don't question any of the details of your memory necessarily. You just think, "Oh yeah," and then I walked, and then on the other side of the road there was this guy, and this guy said this, and I just wrote that down.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I remember one passage in High Fidelity where I was writing and I thought, the phone box is on the other side of the street, and then he crosses the road to get in the phone box. And as I was writing the sentence, I thought, why is the phone box on the other side of the street? Why can't it be on this side of the street? And then I thought, why isn't he waiting till he gets home, till he calls her? And I just realised that everything was built on sand. Every detail was changeable if you let it be changeable. Whereas I'd had these very secure tent posts with Fever Pitch, and I became much more frightened of the process of writing fiction, or self-conscious about it while I was writing High Fidelity, and I had to get over that.
And did it then take longer to write than Fever Pitch?
Yeah. No, there's nothing that has been as easy as Fever Pitch.
Right.
Fever Pitch was 6 months, I would say, beginning to end.
What's your process now then? Because obviously you've written a string of successful books. You've presumably found a way to get past that kind of shifting sand way. What's the method there? And what sort of kind of process do you have now?
I don't really have a process. I would say that the only thing that has kind of worked for me is that ever since Fever Pitch was published, it's taken me time, either because of publicity or because of other projects in recent years, specifically film projects. It's taken me a lot of time to get to the book. And by the time I get there, I tend to know quite a lot about it. I mean, it just occupies mental space, and there comes a point when I'm quite frustrated that I haven't been able to start it. But I start with a beginning and characters, and the characters I know pretty well by the time I sit down. Most of the narrative is done on the hoof. I usually have kind of a couple of things that I'm pitching towards, maybe in the middle and the end of the book, but a lot of it is kind of narrative set pieces, and it's set piece to set piece, and I don't really plot it out. My brother-in-law, who mostly writes thrillers, Robert Harris, I mean, he's sort of terrifyingly organized, because he needs to be, and I understand why he does what he does, but I don't have to do that. And a lot of the fun for me is generating narrative during the course of the day, thinking, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen when I sat down, but now it has happened and it feels all right.
So do you kind of have an idea for where you want to take the story, but not necessarily how it'll end up or how you'll even get there and stuff?
Yes, it's more or less, it's all done by tone, really. I know the tone that I want to hit at the end, and then I find the narrative that gets me there.
And does that lead to, cul-de-sacs when you're writing that first draft or anything? Do you find yourself going in a direction and then thinking, oh, I'll need to write this?
I have done, yeah. About a Boy and A Long Way Down, I remember I hit cul-de-sacs, and About a Boy I chucked quite a lot, the most I've ever chucked of a book, probably the first 20,000 words or something.
Wow.
That was a bad day.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And what's changed? I suppose, is there a solution to that, or would you not want to change the way that you write and plan to avoid that?
I think I think that the solution is just thinking, and I think that as I've got older and I've got more experienced, I have ways of checking that the narrative is sturdy enough before I write it. With About a Boy, I was denying too much information, both from the characters and from the reader, and I found that I was writing stuff that didn't go where I wanted it to go, didn't cut deep enough or true enough, because it was based on this kind of high concept riff, and which might have worked for a movie, but really didn't work in a book when I was trying to be quite internal with the characters. So I was sort of being internal, but also denying information. And I reached a point where I thought, no, this doesn't work at all. I have to start from the beginning and not deny the information.
And so is your process, I know you said you don't really have a process, but when you're writing a novel, do you go through a number of drafts then, or do you're someone that revises as you go and try to fix it as you go?
I think that the first drafts are in reasonable shape. I can't go on and leave something if I know it's not right. And also a book, it's quite a big thing. So you can, if you feel it changing course, you can do it slowly within the course of a book, and maybe it will take a different narrative shape. Whereas with the screenwriting, you've got no time or space at all. So you can't sort of switch in midstream or take it to a different place, because you've wasted too much time already, as it were.
Yeah. And I kind of wondered about your jump into the screenplay world. I mean, how did that move come about? Was that due to the adaptation of the Fever Pitch book? Was that how you kind of got into it?
Well, that was the first time I'd been paid for anything that was made. Yes, and weirdly, that came right at the beginning of the publication. The young director who made the film, he made a piece about the book for the BBC, and he said, I want to make a feature film of this, before it was published. And I sort of laughed and said, yeah, right, be my guest. It didn't seem the most natural thing for a movie. And he said, well, you've got to adapt it, because it's going to be your memoir that I need you to fictionalize it, and you're the best person to do that. And so I said, oh, okay, I'll have a go. And I did a draft or two drafts, and then we met a young producer, and then we took it to Film 4. And I mean, the whole thing took about 5 years, I guess. And I never really thought it would happen. I just kept doing drafts until eventually Film 4 said, oh, we can go with this now, which surprised me greatly. then I didn't really think very much of doing screenplays. I knew I didn't want to adapt my own books after that. Not because I hadn't had a good time doing it, but because, well, it became clear to me that I had things that I wanted to do. I had ideas. I had ideas for a next book and the book after. And given it was taking like 2 years to write a novel and 5 years to then adapt it, I thought there's no way I'm living with this material for 7 years. I really want to get on and do something else. So whenever a book was optioned after that, I just said, fine, you do what you want with it. I don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. The big change for me was an education. And that came because my wife, who is an independent producer, she was just sort of looking to get back into the game after having kids. And, you know, she's a young independent producer. She was looking for books. And I remember we had this conversation where I said, look, the books you're being offered or you're getting your hands on are the books that every other film company, studio has turned down, basically. Mm-hmm. So you're thinking about books that actually people have decided aren't going to make movies. Yeah. And so you're working at a handicap. And I said, I think you should look for other things. You should look for magazine articles, fragments of autobiography, whatever it is. And right at that moment, I read this essay in Granta by Lynn Barber. And I said, like this, look at this, look at this. And it was about 7 pages. Mm-hmm. But it had such great characters in it and such a surprising story. So she optioned it, much to Lynn's surprise, I think. And then when she started talking about screenwriters, I suddenly felt very possessive of the material and said, I want to have a go. And again, it took a long time, but it was such a, you know, something I became so proud of. And you know, she got an Oscar nomination, I got an Oscar nomination. You think, oh, this is actually fun. And mm-hmm. And I had colleagues for the first time for a long time, and I enjoyed having colleagues as well.
Well, I was going to ask about that because obviously it is a more collaborative process, screenwriting, which I suppose comes with pluses and minuses. I mean, what is it that, you know, what is your take on it? Is it something that you enjoy, having written novels on your own for so long, that having that collaborative process?
Yeah, I enjoy it, and I enjoy working with directors. I love working with actors. Well, it wasn't something that I knew I was going to love, but the first table reading we had for an education, I realized that in my head, I knew how to say all these lines, and that therefore the finished version of the film would either be as good as the version in my head or not as good as the version in my head. Okay. Mm-hmm. And at the table reading with Carey Mulligan and Alfred Molina, I thought, oh, it's better than the version I had in my head, that they find way more nuance and shade and all this thing in the lines. And I think this is incredible. And you know, that cast was so amazing anyway, Rosamund and Dominic Cooper, that I was kind of really knocked out by what actors could do. And so then that became something then I wanted to think about properly as doing more screenplays.
And a lot of the screenplays that you've written have been adaptations, you know, stuff like Wild or Brooklyn. And what is it? Is it harder or easier when you're writing a screenplay that you've kind of got a base book from? You know, is it freeing, or is it constructive, or is it a nice thing to be constructed by? Is it
completely nice? I mean, it's a bit like, you know, what I was saying about memoir at the beginning. Mm-hmm. These things happen and you write them, mm-hmm. and to have a book. This is what happens in the book, and of course you can change things and so on. But you know, if a book really works, you don't really want to change that much. Yeah. I think the trouble with original screenplays and why they're so hard to get off the ground is simply that shifting sands thing again.
Mm-hmm.
That let's say you've got a boy meets girl story set in the 1970s. At some point, somebody will say, "Why isn't it a guy meets guy story in the 1980s?" And you think, actually, I've got no idea why it's not a guy meets guy story in the 1980s. And there, the collaborative nature and the numbers of people involved are probably not helpful because everything is up for grabs at all time. Yeah. Whereas with a book, nothing's really up for grabs. Brooklyn is about what it's about, and your decisions are within the context of the novelist's work.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say about adaptation is that every time I've started a book, I don't write in a genre. I don't write returning characters. So every time I start out thinking, I haven't done this before, this is new for me. And then halfway through the process, I think, it's me again. Because you're stuck with who you are. I think I saw a novelist, who was it? Anyway, somebody recently saying, you've basically got a deck of cards with about 40 cards in it. You haven't got the whole deck, and all you can do is shuffle those cards. And that's kind of true. You are who you are. Your interests are what they are. Your soul is what it is. Your empathy is what it is. Yeah. And you get stuck, and you have to make the best of that. And so with adapting someone else's work, I think, I could never have written this in a million years. And now I've been given access to this material. So it's like I've gone out of my own head and into somebody else's. And that's incredibly
You've been given more cards to the
deck. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a nice way to look at it, actually. I hadn't thought about it in that way. But I suppose it is exactly. You're getting more cards in your deck. You're playing with the different tools, blah, blah, blah. Merging these metaphors.
Just because you're who you are doesn't mean you can't love other things.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
We all love music that is not like we are. Mm-hmm. We try and cover as wide a range as possible and find people who express our feelings, whether it's in jazz or classical or hard rock or whatever, and maybe all of those at once. And, Wild is a case in point. I adored that book. I could never have written it in a million years. I hadn't done that walk for a start. Mm-hmm. And, it was about all sorts of things that I don't normally think about, but I responded, purely emotionally to that book. And I wanted to adapt it for that reason.
And when you're in that film process, you hear about in screenplays the sort of the producer's notes and all this sort of stuff. I mean, do you find that similar to a process of getting notes from an editor, or is it a bit different? Is it, having other people involved in a film makes it slightly more difficult to stick to what you want to write?
Yeah, it makes it more difficult. And I've mostly been lucky in that I've worked with people I've trusted. I mean, you have an individual relationship with an editor, and if that relationship isn't working, then you're not with that editor anymore.
Yeah.
So it's very simple in book terms. You're not going to flog through book after book with someone who doesn't like your writing or thinks you should be writing something else. Whereas every film project is a whole different cast of people, some of whom are better than others, and sometimes more than one production company. And of course, sometimes they are arguing about things for reasons that are not to do with the art of the screenplay, and they're perfectly at liberty to do that. I mean, some scenes are too expensive, and so you're told they're too expensive, and you either lose them or reconfigure them in a way that's a lot cheaper. I completely get all that. The hardest thing is when you feel that you're getting notes from somebody who's dim.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. And the other thing, but when we've spoken to other people about this as well, is that you're getting notes. It's not just one person giving you notes. There's a whole stream of people that are giving notes, and sometimes they can be in conflict and all of this sort of stuff. So, that bit of the process doesn't sound like a lot of fun. But
well, that's where I think you need a good hands-on producer through whom everything is funneled. And I've got my wife and her producing partner, who I've worked with on 2 finished films and a couple of unmade films, but they are very good at weeding out the notes that are coming from above them, if there is an above them. I mean, with both An Education and Brooklyn, there was nobody above us. It just started with the 3 of us, and no money, no cast, no nothing. Just the money we had to option the book in the case of Brooklyn. And then as it goes on, more and more people join in. But by then your script is in a reasonable enough state that they're considering joining in the first place. You've done a lot of the work. The hardest ones have been, I've worked on maybe 4 American movies that haven't gone anywhere at all. And that is often because of completely conflicting notes.
And I imagine that must be...
And bloody directors as well.
And I imagine that must be incredibly frustrating because you put so much time and effort into this, and it takes so long to get somewhere just to get told, just for it to fall apart at that point. It must be... And I mean, is that the same as it is in the TV world? Because I know you're in the TV world a little bit now.
Yeah.
Is it similar, the same idea, or is it quicker?
Some things have been quicker, but I think I've had a fairly firm grasp right from the beginning that there's probably a 1 in 10 shot that this will get made.
Okay.
And that if you want the secure knowledge that your work is not going to be wasted, then this isn't the right job for you.
Yeah.
That you have to play those percentages. There were different stages in my career, I suppose, when I was being paid to do something and I wanted the money, with a young family and blah, blah, blah. I'd say at this stage of my career, I need to know that I've got a better than 1 in 10 chance of something being made. But you can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee that my work is going to find the people who understand it. I can't guarantee that the money will ever be raised. I can't guarantee that you will find a sufficient level of casting to get the film made, that somebody at this level is interested but not at that level, and that can doom the whole thing. So I think that the thing with film is not to focus on one project. That if you're going to do it, make sure you have 4 or 5 on the go, because if it's just the one and you've done what you can on it, you'll drive yourself crazy. This is never going to be made, or this needs to be made. It's just out of your hands once you've done as good a job as you can. And then it will come back to you with the director at some point.
And in terms of making a career in the film or the TV world, if you spend 6 months or a year working on something and then it falls apart, do you still get to use that kind of that street cred of everyone in the industry knows that you wrote the script, and you can still use that to promote yourself, or do you lose? Do you only really get the credit if it gets made? I mean, how much of a loss is it really to you if it falls apart?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I think that a lot of these things I've been talking about that never got made, the American things, they were all announced and my name was attached to them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that did me any good. The fact that, I don't know, me and Jason Reitman were working on something together. It never got made. But, there was a story that Nick Hornby and Jason Reitman are collaborating.
Yeah.
I imagine if that story gets in the trade press, then somebody somewhere is thinking, he's interesting, that writer, and now he's doing this thing with Jason Reitman. Mm-hmm. I don't think they ever think, actually that never came out, 5 years later. It's just all chatter that keeps you in the game, I guess.
But most recently, you've moved back into novel writing. You released your first novel for a few years, Just Like You, which just came out in September, I think.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, I mean, I still think of myself as a screenwriter and a novelist. Mm-hmm. I mean, those two things. And before I tell you about the book, that process, the thing about writing a novel is it has to come from you. It's got to be your idea, and then you've got to create the time to do it. And like 95% of my screen work comes from outside. So, at the beginning of 2018, say, I think, right, this is the year I'm going to write this novel. And then I get a phone call and it's something I really, really want to do in screen. So the novel's gone for another few months. Yeah. And so the fact that it's sort of 5 years between novels is not me not thinking of myself as a novelist, but committing to work that's going to take a while, and then something else coming along and something else coming along. Maybe something that I wrote a long time ago coming back and needing work. So it's not so much going back to novel writing. It never went away, but it's harder to create that space where I can write it. I had an idea a long time ago about a couple who were separated by particularly class and age, and whether in Britain it was possible to connect romantically with someone who was outside of your class and your education background. And, it's not something we do, I think, in England an awful lot, or in Britain an awful lot. America, it seems to be freer in that way, but we're very hidebound by all sorts of things. We almost have arranged marriages in terms of, somebody who's read this book and been to this, studied this at this university or whatever. And I kept thinking about them, and then race got added to it as well along the way. And I didn't really know what to do with them until after the referendum. And then it seemed to me that, it looked like one half of the country was never going to talk to the other again. And I thought maybe I should think about them, this couple, in this context where there is a lot of division and anger, and I wanted to try and write an optimistic book about connection at a time of disconnection.
And how was it as well? The other issue, as well as Brexit and everything that's going on. Obviously, you're launching the book in 2020, which is not the best year to do that. I mean, how did you find that, and how different was it from previous launches?
Well, there's been a lot of this. I did an American book tour from this chair, which I kind of quite liked, because American book tours are punishing, and you can't do anything else while you're doing that, and it's maybe a month, of your writing year gone. But I was sort of writing, and then at 6 o'clock do a Zoom to Texas or whatever. So there was that. I think it's very hard for booksellers at the moment, because they're relying on Amazon and online, and it's a certain kind of book that takes over in that environment.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, they've been saying that lots of people have been reading and all this sort of stuff during lockdown and everything, but it's just, it must be more difficult to try and stand out if you're launching a book in this. If you don't have the bookshop, if you don't have a book launch, if you don't, it's just just as you were saying, it's certain types of book that will jump out to people.
I mean, it's all right for someone like me, because I know I'll get reviewed and I know that I'll get stocked. But I think younger writers, it's really, really tough. And yes, it seems as though we're reading more, but let's face it, we've all got enough books in our houses that we haven't read. No one has to go out and buy another book. No. And if in fact you can't buy books because the shops are closed, you're more likely to look at what's on the shelves and I think like some people have done, about what they've never read, that felt that they should have read, or that they'd always wanted to read. So that doesn't necessarily help you if you've got a new book coming out.
No.
Does the state of play in terms of things like Brexit, which you've mentioned, and COVID, does that influence? Obviously, it does influence to some level, what you want to write about and the thoughts that you want to share and stuff. And is it important, you think, that books kind of tackle, not all books obviously, but certain books tackle these big issues that are going on right now, and especially in terms of the division in society, etc., Brexit and Trump's America and that sort of thing? Is it important that there's messages in the work that you do?
Well, I've never tried to write a book that addresses things so directly as I did in Just Like You, where there's a political contemporary event. I was emboldened to do it partly because I felt I was doing something different from what I'd read about other writers doing. And my angle was that I was fed up with my own side. I voted to remain, and like all the other Remainers, I hated everyone who'd voted to leave and thought they were mad and so on. But after a few weeks, I really started to get sick of listening to Remainers talking about how ignorant everyone was and how brainwashed they'd been. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a petition the day after the referendum saying, a petition calling for the vote to be replayed or something. And I kept getting emails from people saying, you've got to sign this petition. And you think, what the hell? We just had a petition yesterday,
exactly.
and we lost it. I had emails from people saying 1.2 million have already signed it. You say, it was 18 million. I said, when you get up to 17.5 million, let me know and I'll join in. And it all dribbled out at about 1.8 million. And the arrogance of that position, like we know that we have to do this again because we're clever and we're right. So it enabled me to take a position of neutrality when I was writing the book. And I did try to give people who were voting to leave persuasive arguments, or at least empathetic arguments, not just, I've had enough of it, and they won't let us sell bendy bananas, and there are too many Polish people here. I wanted to avoid that. So I was encouraged by that. I think COVID, it's hard for me to imagine at the moment that I will have a thought that somebody else hasn't had at some point in the last 10 months. Yeah. And I'm also rather dreading the amount of COVID literature and isolation literature that's in the works. I don't know how much of it I will want to read, and I don't think I want to write any of it.
And also, it would be, well, hopefully, it will be very dated very quickly in relation to...
Hopefully, yeah. But a lot of these things are being written out, and I think when they come out, whether it's cinema or TV or books, they'll come out just at a time when we are allowed to explore wider horizons. And you think, oh, great, a bloody film about two people in a room not being able to go out. I don't want to watch that. One of my friends is the film director, Paul Greengrass, and he's got this Western coming out over Christmas called News of the World. And we were on holiday together in the summer, and he had to check the grade on the film. So we went to a local cinema in France and watched this Western on this massive screen. Right. And it was the opposite of COVID. It was just fantastic to be in that world. And it made me think then, I don't want to write about isolation and quarantine. I want horses and skies.
You want that kind of escapism and
exactly. Even if it's grim or grim and intelligent stuff, it's still escapism from where we are now.
Totally. I also wanted to ask quickly about the Ministry of Stories, which you founded. What was your think? Is that from your background as a teacher, partly that you wanted to help with the young people reading and writing?
It was completely, I mean, there's that, which I think I learned an awful lot from, actually, teaching in a comprehensive school. I think that the kind of books I write were the kinds of books that I was looking for when I was trying to teach, which was that they are inclusive. That the reason that Of Mice and Men comes up again and again and again and again in school stock cupboards is because that book is so easy to understand, and nobody can solve the problems of those characters, however smart they are. And that's like a perfect model of a book, I think. That's what I wanted to do, I suppose, when I started to write. And my friend Roddy Doyle, I think, he'd been a teacher as well, and he ended up, I think, writing similar books that were inclusive. So I think that shaped both of us in that way. But the Ministry of Stories entirely came from my relationship with Dave Eggers in America, who started these schools there. And whenever I went to visit him in San Francisco at the end of a book tour, he always took me down to 826 Valencia, which was the first of his. And it's such an amazing place. And I got so much energy from it and hope from it, where he, the idea of putting young professionals in the arts together with inner city kids who weren't getting enough help with their schoolwork, and coming up with all this amazing creativity and fun. And I always thought, I want to do this in London. And then I'd get back off the plane after book tour thinking, who am I kidding? I've got 3 kids and I've got a job and I'm not going to start this school. But then I was introduced to 2 people who wanted to do it. And so I was able to say, yeah, of course, I'll front it and you get it set up. And that's what we did.
Awesome. And I mean, what would your advice be to young adults who are wanting to try and get into the industry and become an author? Is there what's the best path for younger people trying to break in?
Well, I think these are in some ways exciting times because there are so many different forms and models suddenly. I mean, obviously it's financially less secure than it was, but I think they're casting a much wider net than they used to. It used to be a particular kind of person who ended up writing, and it was a job for gentlemen and ladies, really. I think this is right. When Penguin started, they didn't bother paying royalties in paperbacks because the assumption was that was slightly vulgar, to deal with that. I'd say all these platforms, there isn't one kind of writing. And, I did this thing for AMC in America called State of the Union, which was 10-minute episodes. Well, I didn't know, I just had this idea of writing in 10 minutes and thought I didn't know who would be interested. But, Stephen Frears directed it and we got a good cast and people found a way, and there are all these platforms for stuff like that. Books are still a great way in. Publishers still are looking for young writers, and people are still reading. But I think there are more opportunities than there were, and in I know people are writing for video games. I know people who are writing for all kinds of television and online platforms, and there's stuff going on that didn't used to be going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's next for you? You said you were working on some screenplay projects. Is that what the focus is just now, or have you got another book?
Yeah, I haven't got another book. There are, I guess, 3 or 4, I don't know, depends what's dead and what isn't. But there's an adaptation of a novel that I did a long time ago, which is currently, they're trying to cast and raise money for. That doesn't involve me at the moment. There's a 2nd season of State of the Union being filmed in January, so I still have bits of work. It's a different couple. It's an older couple, so it's like the same idea, 10 minutes before marital therapy. But all being well, that's got Brendan Gleeson and Patricia Clarkson in it, and
Brilliant.
Stephen's directing again. But my big job is 2 seasons of drama about the Rolling Stones.
Oh, wow.
Nice. Awesome.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's amazing that I'm getting to do it. And I keep saying most things that collapse, you have no memories of whatever happened apart from a couple of Zoom calls or maybe some meetings in a featureless office. But because we need the band's permission to do this, then I've already had a more exciting pre-production life than one could ever have imagined. And I keep having to talk to Mick. I'm delivering scripts to Mick.
Oh, wow.
Which is terrifying. And I'm working for FX in the States. I would say where we're at, there's probably a 20% chance of it being made rather than a 10% chance of it being made. But when you're talking about risk and whether you're prepared to take the risk, this is a project where I'm 1,000% prepared to take the risk. I mean, I'm being well paid for it, but I could be well paid doing something else that had a better chance, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
This is just unmissable. It's
that sounds like an
a glorious thing. So it's 16 episodes from 1963 to 1974, and
awesome.
In the writing process, I'm about halfway through the first season.
So it's a case of having actors play the younger version of the band type thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So and we've got access to the music.
Wow.
And so I'm sort of. I've got a team of researchers and all that sort of thing, which is pretty exciting, and it's an amazing job, but it may well all end in tears.
How much control do you have over that in terms of because you hear say I'll sign the music over to you, but don't mention the fact that I did drugs and blah blah. Are you allowed to? Is it kind of warts and all?
That's very interesting. We haven't really talked about it, but I'm working on the presumption that so much is in the public domain that they would be a bit daft to say that never happened. Mm-hmm. There are some things we all know happened, and they were sentenced to prison for drugs. So these are matters of public record, and they've all, well, not Mick, but everyone else has written autobiographies, and they've talked about their heroin use and their promiscuity, and so I think the trick is to write it in such a way that I don't cross some kind of line. I don't need to invent very much. It's such an extraordinary story anyway. And I find the central relationship between Mick and Keith actually very moving, because they were at primary school together.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And the band is 60 years old soon. And that's incredible, I think, given what they've been through, that they still perform on stage together.
And they're still meant to be fantastic live for how old they are and how long
they're unbelievable. When I had to pitch to the whole band, we had to fly to Miami, me and the producer, and pitch to them in the bowels of a football stadium a couple of hours before a show. And the show, I said to the manager, I've seen them twice, once in 1975 and once in 2019. And the 2019 show was way better than the 1975 show. Without a doubt. I think they've got it now that it can't fall below a certain level, and it probably can't go above a certain level either, because everything's so brilliantly managed, and that it's sort of within that range, if you see what I mean. but the bottom level is very, very high.
Oh,
And
right.
Mick had just had a heart operation when I first started talking to him, and he's 78, I think, and these stages are enormous, and he's running from one side of the stage to the other. And when you think about what your grandparents were like when you were a kid, they probably weren't 78 even, but they were not capable of running from one side of the stage to the other. I don't know what it is. I guess it's the best medical fitness regime you can possibly buy.
And maybe the years of drug use and promiscuity.
Yeah, all the things we're warned of. Yeah,
exactly.
There's still time for us, guys. We can still crack this.
But it's been a lot of fun so far, and really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I look forward to it.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book I read was Saul Bellows' Henderson the Rain King. And that was purely, as we were talking about, that something that I had on my shelves that I thought, I've never read any Saul Bellow, and maybe now is the time to read it.
Nice. And what about the last film that you watched?
Well, I mean, again, lockdown is a ton. I think literally the last one was that Romanian documentary Collective.
What's that about?
I've not heard of that.
It's Collective was a nightclub in Romania that burnt to the ground, and about 80 kids died. It was a heavy metal concert. There were no fire exits.
Right.
And it resulted in the fall of the government, but there was one newspaper that went after the health people in Romania, not because of the fire, but because I think something like 40 people have died in hospital. They came out alive, and in any Western hospital they would have lived, and they all died. And this journalist newspaper investigating find bigger scandal. I mean, it's kind of jaw-dropping. So it turns into All the President's Men, except it gets really depressing at the end. But one of the things they find out is that every hospital in Romania was buying its disinfectant from the same company, and it was diluted like 10 times.
Jeez.
My God.
Anyway, I noticed it because it's had a couple of good reviews recently. And then before that, Walter Matthau in A New Leaf, which was an Elaine May film from the early 70s that I kept seeing mentioned in greatest 100 films of the 70s and things, but I'd never seen.
Excellent.
It was okay.
And what was the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
I watch TV all the time. It's been brilliant, I think. I am in the middle of a show called Rectify. Have you ever heard of it?
I have heard of it.
Yeah, I got the box set for Christmas or recently anyway. It's on my shelf. I've not watched it yet, but I've heard it's meant to be very good.
Well, the reason, do you ever look at Metacritic?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was on Metacritic looking at best new TV shows. And then I noticed it had best of all time, best reviewed of all time. And I think Rectify was number one.
Oh, wow.
Like, the best reviewed TV show of all time. I think, I've never heard of this series. And in Britain, you can find it on Acorn TV if you subscribe extra to Amazon at £4.99 a month.
Okay.
Anyway, it's one of the best TV shows I've ever seen.
Oh, wow.
Excellent.
Yeah, it was my parents gave me the box set, and they loved it. They watched it on the Acorn thing. I don't know how they found out about it, but they said it was fantastic. And
it's amazing.
It's in there. I need to watch it.
Yeah. It's devastatingly sad, is all I would say.
Okay.
It's sort of, are you Friday Night Lights fans?
Yeah.
That's my favourite show of all time.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's sort of Friday Night Lights crossed with True Detective.
Oh,
wow.
this sounds like my... Cool, I don't know why I've waited so long to watch this.
It's small town Georgia and family, but the family is very, very affected by something very terrible.
Excellent.
Right, okay,
I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah.
Acorn TV, here we come.
Yeah.
And the very, very last thing we do is a quick fire either or, and there's no right answers apart from one. And the first one is Colin Firth or Jimmy Fallon.
Oh, Colin Firth.
Would you Arsenal winning the Champions League or Arsenal winning the Premier League?
Champions League. Never seen it. Seen the Premier League a few times.
Yeah.
That would be. I'm guessing that would be the thing that I may well die without having seen it.
Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Takeaway.
TV or cinema in normal times?
Given recent qualities of both, I would go TV.
Mm.
Nice. And the last one, real book or ebook?
Real. I still feel lost with all the 70%, and it feels so airless compared to real book.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Excellent. Tarek's a big ebook advocate, but yeah.
Well, I use them, and again, when I'm traveling, it's incredible to have as many books as you want in something very small. But if I'm at home, I buy books and I read them.
Well, that was a really fun chat we had with Nick. A really nice guy, and really interesting what he was saying about the cards in your hand. I thought that quite an interesting analogy.
Everyone ultimately has the same, not quite a full deck of cards. But by sort of working with other people and sort of adapting stories and stuff, you're able to expand your hand, as it were. So it's quite a good analogy of that. Also, I thought it was interesting what he was saying, that breaking in to novel writing it's less of a punt for a publisher to sort of take a chance on a young writer, and they'll know that they might improve over 2 or 3 books or whatever, but you can't do that with a movie because movies just cost so much money, which is it's maybe counterintuitive, that in the sense that writing a screenplay is as a length of work is a shorter thing than a novel.
That's a good point, isn't it? It's true. You can bang out a whole bunch of screenplays a lot faster than you could one book, and yet the screenplay is the harder thing ultimately to get made. The riskier project with more money, and the book is something that takes you a lot longer, and is ultimately perhaps easier to get out there.
I think that's probably right.
Setup.
But very much looking forward to that Rolling Stones series.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and just
excellent access you got to all.
I know, just the process of getting access to these guys and just talking.
Just having to spend time with them.
I know, it'd be amazing.
Imagine the stories that he knows that he's not allowed to tell.
Exactly. Exactly. It'll be interesting to see what turns up in that show. Which I know he said it maybe has a 20% chance at this stage of getting made, but you've got to think that if you pitch a series about the Rolling Stones,
there's an audience there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
You would have thought it'd be a strange one to say no to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that Paul Greengrass movie he was talking about is just out on Netflix, is it? I think News of the World with Tom Hanks.
It is indeed. I think it was out yesterday or day before time recording. Yeah, I've not watched it yet, but that's one I will definitely have to check out. Yeah,
that and Rectify, which I've not checked out yet.
Rectify, unfortunately, even though it's been a few weeks since we recorded it, it's still sat wrapped up in cellophane on my bookshelf. So sorry, Mum, I will get around to watching that at some point, I promise.
Cool. Well, thanks very much to Nick for taking the time to come on to the podcast. We really enjoyed that chat. And we've got another great guest next week.
We do. We have a really exciting guest next week. We've chatted with Helen Whitaker, who is a journalist and a novelist. She was involved in High Life magazine, which is the British Airways in-flight magazine.
Yeah.
Entertainment director at Glamour UK. And she's also contributed to various places, The Telegraph, Total Film, and her books are The School Run and her latest novel, just out, is I Give It a Year.
Yeah, it's a really fun chat. And actually, I think there's a kind of similarity in the stories, some aspects of the stories that she's telling with Nick's stories as well. So definitely tune in for that one. And as ever, before we go, I would just ask that if you enjoyed the episode, please take a couple of seconds to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. That always helps us climb the rankings.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page One, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.